You can't have an innovative economy without an innovative government.
You seem to have a bee in your bonnet for digital government.
People are rewarded for not changing.
Do Canadians know what that means?
We've got to start breaking our own rules.
And for some reason, we think we can't do this stuff.
So if you build for the 100%, you know what you get? Phoenix.
Welcome to the Functional Government Podcast. In Canada, there are 134 ways for someone to apply for a federal grant or loan. They're not connected, so if you're a Canadian, you have to try them all, like whack-a-mole. If you don't qualify for one, you have no idea why another one might be perfect for you. And using a service like this isn't easy either. The federal government has 270 separate online services, which you sign into with 60 unique usernames and passwords that you have to keep track of, administered by 33 different federal departments. When we decided to launch Functional, there was one person I knew we needed to speak with. He's an independent senator from Nova Scotia. When he was appointed, he was given a simple mandate: challenge government. He's a sensible, plainspoken advocate for simplifying government. He has a background as an entrepreneur and a good understanding of technology. He's driven by data, and he's not afraid to ask questions, often publicly. Please welcome a federal senator from Nova Scotia, the Honorable Colin Deacon. Hi, Senator Deacon. How are you?
Just great. Really excited about this, Alistair.
For folks who aren't familiar with your work, can you tell us a little bit about what you do as a senator and how that's different from what people might know about the more visible senators that are in the news a lot south of the border?
Well, our job is just legislate, investigate, and represent. So we work on legislation, we find problems in legislation, and I particularly am interested in privacy, cybersecurity, digitally related, entrepreneurship related issues. So I spend a lot of time looking at that. And that's the neat thing about the chamber that I work in, is it's full of a diversity of people with very specific backgrounds and depth of knowledge in certain subject areas. So it allows us to really focus in. I focus in heavily on low levels of investment in digital and data-driven businesses in this country, and the low levels of digitization of our government services. So those are the things that I tend to really focus on.
Those sound pretty near and dear to our hearts. Why should people care? Like you said, people have different backgrounds. What about your background makes you qualified to have opinions on government modernization?
Well, I'm a former entrepreneur, so I know how to fail. I know how to sometimes succeed. I know the challenges of building businesses and making our economy one that is more equitable and more prosperous. And it's a passion of mine. And I really believe that there's so much that entrepreneurs can offer our government in creating opportunity for Canadians. And for me, it's bringing that voice. And I can't tell you, it's a huge honor to do this job, but it's a big challenge to appropriately represent the voices, the concerns, the aspirations of our innovators and entrepreneurs, because Ottawa's not a innovation and business and entrepreneurship focused city.
So you don't really represent a riding or a jurisdiction the way that an elected MP does. It sounds like you kind of represent an area of concern. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I'm there to represent Nova Scotia and issues that are particular to Nova Scotia for sure. But there's no question that the issues within Nova Scotia that I place the most time and attention on are related to what I've just spoken about. But the beauty is, like, more than 80, I think it's 85% of senators now are independent. We're not whipped. We're not told what to say or how to vote. And that's a huge change from the past. It used to be, you're either conservative or liberal in the Senate. And it was, as one of my colleagues has said, it was sort of like an off-Broadway version of the House of Commons. And we don't need more of that agitation, partisan agitation. I don't think Canadians want any more of it.
Does it make it easier for you to work with your colleagues on things that might cross party lines?
Absolutely. And the only request that the Prime Minister made of me, and my hat's off to Prime Minister Trudeau in this, is he said, I want you to challenge the government. There's not been a Prime Minister in history that has appointed somebody to the Senate and said, I want you to challenge the government. It's be loyal to the government. So I try to do that respectfully, collegially, but that's my job.
Do you think the government needs challenging these days?
It really does. I mean, it's so hard to make any changes in Ottawa. There are always 1,000 reasons why we shouldn't, and the reasons why we should get drowned out by those. And the system, the culture is one of not changing too often, and people are rewarded for not changing.
There was an Ezra Klein, Jon Stewart podcast I listened to a couple of days ago, where Ezra Klein details the reasons why certain programs weren't able to be put into place. And for example, high-speed rail, he talks about some process that would have taken, 4 years, and then the state has 6 months to review, and then it goes back, and it was just, by the time he got to like bullet 14 of why this thing can't pass, it was impossible for a party of any stripes following due process to get things done within the period of time they were elected to do them.
The reality is there are too many rules, and the public service starts working for the rules rather than the end result. And I don't blame them, because, who wants to destroy their career by breaking a rule that somebody can just rip you apart on in the House of Commons and in the public service? But the reality is we have to, as a country, especially in this Trump tariff age, where we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day or the day after that, we have got to become more independent. And so the reality, as far as I'm concerned, we've got to start breaking our own rules and finding new ways of getting things done. We've got to worry about our global competitiveness, which we've been falling behind our peers at an alarming pace. And we've got to use things like, climate change and diversity, equity, inclusion as ways for us to grow as the basis of our future economy. These are not burdens. These are opportunities. And right now we're approaching them with a viewpoint that is not entrepreneurial. It doesn't take advantage of all the innovative capacity that exists outside of government. The crowdsourcing that we can do amongst people that are solving big, hairy problems every day is being ignored. And that, for me, is a source of enormous frustration.
Yeah, I always feel like humans can do amazing things, but we just can't get out of our own way. Like so many of these problems about resource allocation or about accessibility or whatever can just be solved if we just apply ourselves to them. There are lots and lots of places that we could focus on improving as Canadians. And as you say, we really have to right now, given geopolitical pressures, from budget to healthcare to employment to security. But you seem to have a bee in your bonnet for digital government in particular. And obviously that makes us great friends, because I tend to agree as well. But why is it for you that digital government is like a keystone or a leverage point in making Canada functional?
So it starts on a foundational belief, and it's the motto of our office, that you can't have an innovative economy without an innovative government. It's just not possible, because government defines how we all function, how everything happens in the economy. It creates the structures, the rules, the frameworks that guide everything that we do on a daily basis. So it starts from that foundation, but also it's the relationship between productivity and competitiveness. If you've got a government service that takes people a lot of time, you're taking that time out of their lives, out of their productivity, not just having perhaps an expensive service within government, but you're taking it out of everybody's lives every time they interact. And I'll give you an example in Nova Scotia. We have online booking of our blood tests, x-rays, a whole lot of different medical services, procedures. We can decide where we want to go to get that test done, what time, anywhere in the province, if we want to. We can reschedule, and that spot or cancel, and that spot's automatically filled without anybody having to do anything. It's just the system does it for them. And everyone is better served at a lower cost, and our resources across the province are more equitably utilized than if it was ever being managed by a person. And if you don't want to use the digital service, you can still call a person, and it's not a long wait time, because not everybody's calling that person. So it's,
This gets back to, I think, one of the big criticisms people say is, oh, that service isn't accessible. Not everyone has a cell phone. And the counter argument that I hear more and more is, well, if we can serve the 95% of people who do have the cell phone, then the 5% that don't, maybe we can not just like deliver their economic services, but like go check up on them in person. Wouldn't that be nice? You see if they're okay. I would love a government that handles the exceptions personally and humanely, as opposed to saying they're marginalized. This idea that we can't do something until everybody can use it, it seems to ignore the idea that we have multiple ways of doing things.
But it ignores what works and builds economies around the world, which is you take a basic idea, you get a beachhead application of that idea, and you start to build from there. And we should be doing that with government services. We should not be building for the 100%, because if you build for the 100%, you know what you get? Phoenix, where 80,000 variables were trying to be managed from day one. It's outrageous. No.
This is off topic a little bit. One of the things that I think we do not want to discuss is the impact of policy-based modernization. Like, you can say, please implement the tax code, or you can say, simplify the tax code and it'll be much easier to implement. If I ask you to develop something with 80,000 variables, that's much harder than having the political will to say, you know what, we're going to put you into 5 buckets. Tell me how we overcome that problem. Because we've got plenty of people that we're talking to on this podcast who have implemented a particular modernization of a service. And we'll get to some of those in a minute. One of the examples is, we're celebrating in Canada now, passports, 30 days or your money back, right? Like the pizza motto. Ireland, 8 minutes after you submit your photo on your phone, the passport starts printing, and the building that used to be required to do all this biometric verification, the government just doesn't need it anymore. And so it seems to me like, yeah, there's these tactical things, but what it's really going to take for some of the thorny issues like digital identity or self-service tax or benefits allocation or payroll in the public sector is a dramatic reduction in the complexity of the law.
You don't get anything done. You can't digitize a service without first rethinking the entire process that you're going to digitize. If you're just taking your existing process, paving over the old cow path, you may be just creating a whole lot more problems. One of the things I find frustrating is how we manage risk in government. And I really feel that we manage risk too often in ways that actually creates it. And we don't realize the risk we're creating because there's not people involved in the process that have done it before. But there are people that have done it before outside of big consulting firms, outside of government. There are entrepreneurs doing similar activities every day and scaling them around the world. And my dream is just to have us start to take Canadian problems, solving them using Canadian innovators and entrepreneurs, and then scaling those great solutions around the world and making businesses that are global out of them. And I think we're smart enough to do that.
Yeah, every time I fly on one of those Bombardier regional jets, the C-210, I'm like, this is the best short flight aircraft that I've ever flown in. And yet we sold it to Airbus. So the reality is we're great at building stuff, and the rest of the Avro arrows are at the bottom of a lake. Like, we're pretty good at building things, but we don't seem to have that last mile go to market sewn up yet. And I think that requires some amount of risk. Okay, let's get back into digital government. So you mentioned some of the economic and service benefits that come from digitization and modernization. I've been doing a lot of research, and as you know, have been running this Forward 50 conference for this will be year 9 now. And in the course of doing that, I've talked to about 60 heads of state from different regions around the world that do digital government. They're all doing great things. And Canada went from number 3 in 2010 to number 47 in terms of the UN's ranking of digital government. Do Canadians know what that means? Like, do we have any idea of how we stack up against other countries?
Unless you've traveled, probably not. And we just think government is government, and frustrating, time-consuming, unpredictable is normal. But the trouble is that erodes trust in government. So if we are going to have a responsible government, we have to have services that are easy, efficient, effective. And then people sort of go, well, why wouldn't you trust it? That's what we have on our phones every day in every other area of our lives. I don't think Canadians know because they haven't gone and lived in another country or experienced the services. But I just can't believe how much further ahead some economies are than us, and how much we seem to be complacent about where it stands today in Canada. And what I like about the approach you're taking here is you want to look at individual issues. Let's see if we can fix this one. Let's see if we can fix that one. What's stopping us from moving ahead? Just do it one bite at a time here. Let's start to prove that things can be remarkably better.
Obviously, loans and funding are near and dear to your heart, helping small business entrepreneurs get access to grants, loans, funding, and so on. How is that broken today, and how could it be better?
Well, it starts with the fact that I don't think there's clarity on what success looks like in the design of the loans, grants, or funding. What is a business that has been incredibly successful? What has it done as a result of that? We found, when a study we did in our office last summer, 135 different programs to support innovators in this country, giving out billions of dollars, but not one of them had KPIs associated. Well, one did, but that was the program they cut in half. No programs had KPIs associated with it. That, to me, is foundational.
And are those at the federal and the provincial levels, or?
No, just the federal government.
There's 135 different programs at the federal government. If I apply for one of those things, does it tell me about the others I might qualify for?
There may be a way to do that, but it's not obvious. And so from my standpoint, you may be trying to apply for something that you have no hope of ever getting. And in my mind, if we're not simplifying the process for innovators, we're not helping innovators. We're
So
just creating another.
disqualification at the top of the funnel, like any business would normally do. But it also sounds like if you're not going to qualify for this one you're applying for, there may be 134 others you do qualify for, but that's not in a unified basket of grants and services.
Exactly. It just makes the whole system less efficient. And when you don't have a key performance indicator associated with a program, how do you know whether or not that program should be cut and those resources put into another program? The CRA has all the information associated, I think, with most key performance indicators. Are your exports growing? Is your business growing? Have you raised any extra capital? How many people do you employ? What's the payroll? All of those basic numbers are already available through CRA. So we can have key performance indicators in terms of what's been accomplished with it.
So why isn't there an effort to turn 135 grant programs into one grant program, associate whatever metrics we have from the CRA with each of those programs, and use that to not only optimize the programs, cancel the ones that don't work, put the money behind the ones that do work, but also use that to predict what kinds of applicants are more likely to benefit from the grants so that the system can get better over time in selecting applicants?
You know, that question is a great idea for a podcast, Alistair.
Okay, so we'll do one episode on grants and funding. Fair enough. We're only here to come on the tops of the waves. But let me talk to you about procurement then. The other side of this is the government trying to procure services. And as you know, and you've mentioned many times, the deck is kind of stacked against smaller businesses, partly because the big organizations have the lawyers to apply through the RFP process, partly because going with someone new and uncertain, you might get blamed for choosing them. Whereas if you go with someone who's well-known, well, you know, it's not your fault because other people have bought from them as well. What's the issue with procurement right now? And like, what are the hoops that an entrepreneur has to jump through there?
So let's just look at people within government who are being really innovative and know there's a solution to a hairy problem, that it's pervasive. They haven't been able to deal with it through traditional means. If they go and find somebody who's got a solution, who doesn't have 5 years of audited financial statements, who doesn't have the ability to fill out a lengthy 1 or 2 or 3 year long procurement process and enter into that long procurement process and compete against those who provide all of that complexity of information easily, and then can come in with, I think, putting the fear into those who are assessing a procurement process, that if they lose, they're going to be challenging the outcome through their lawyers. It puts a small business in a position where, I mean, I built 2 companies and I never did business in Canada once. It was just like I just went the other direction. I just went to the United States and to Europe because it was just so much easier than trying to do business in Canada. And that is criminal. Our procurement processes are anti-competitive, and they're, I think, anti-Canadian. And we've got to fix that. If we want to compete in a world where we have no idea what the man in Washington is going to do in the next hour or minute or week, we have got to find a way to help ourselves in some of these issues. And there's so many ways we can de-risk for public servants innovative projects. I mean, I look at, the whole micro lending model that was created in the 90s around, lending people small amounts of money in groups in a community. And those loans were always being repaid because everybody shared the risk. There's a way that we can have a model where the innovators are being vetted and assisted by other groups outside of government to make sure that government will get the result that it's buying.
So let me challenge you on a couple of things, because as someone else who's built small businesses and only got U.S. funding and so on, the first question I guess I have is, it's been said that it's easier to get $100 million in funding than $100,000 in funding. And the idea there is that, a big project that takes a lot of time and money to roll together comes up with a big budget, so on. But the second question I have is, the funding models we have now are very appropriate for a battleship. Like, if you want to build a battleship, you don't want to buy that from somebody who's just learned how to make boats, right? But the funding model doesn't recognize that many of the products and services that we procure today, first of all, are services, so software as a service rather than software licenses, and that because they're billed on a recurring basis, there's no longer this idea of like a long-term project contract. You're paying on a monthly fee for much of the delivery. It seems to me like procurement for things that are billed on a regular recurring basis and things that are delivered as a service that can be updated over time rather than a battleship, which, once it's in the water, you're not pushing a new hull. It seems like procurement for those kinds of things, particularly, or for things that fly under some kind of threshold where, like, if the cost of the procurement is lower than the cost to vet the procurement, should just be, go ahead and buy the thing that works best.
And the other element is, rather than inside government deciding how to solve a problem and what solution you want, why not put the problem out there and say, here's our constraints in solving it, but are there any crazy ideas for addressing this? So maybe we don't need a battleship, but we need a bunch of drones just to address the specific problem that has been identified, exaggerating to make a point. But we really shouldn't be trying to solve problems only within government. We should be putting it out there to our innovators and see what crazy ideas actually will really work for Canadians in a way that's unique. And I use Ukraine and drones as an example during this battle against Russia and its invasion, an illegal and heinous invasion of their country. They've been incredible world leaders in a new kind of warfare, and taken down an army much, much larger than theirs. So we can do things differently. It's been proven by others, but we're not doing it ourselves.
We obviously have lots of things to discuss about Ukraine, including the fact that they shipped a digital government app called DIA that's so good that USAID, until it was shut down, was exporting it to other countries during a war. And for some reason, we think we can't do this stuff. So we're going to come back to some digital modernization.
They went from way behind us to being world leading in 3 years.
And it was just political will.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's also something that I hear a lot about. And I think it's a factor here is, when we talk to people, I mean, everyone rolls their eyes when you say Estonia because they're the poster child for digital government. But when we talk to people in Estonia who work in the government, they brag about it. They're like, yeah, I work for the government. I built that thing, right? I mean, you get to build an app that everybody uses. That's kind of cool. Whereas here, people are like, no, I don't actually admit that in public, that I work as a public servant. There's a certain amount of like, it's just not cool to be seen as working for the government, which makes it really hard to hire talented people.
The reality is it isn't, and the problem with that is it's not just political leadership needed. It's internal capacity and culture. We need to have a public service where risk is actually not embraced, is maybe a strong word, but understood that you can't get rid of it. You have to manage risk by doing things differently. You cannot eliminate it. And I think we have a dream of eliminating risk in Ottawa, and it'll never be achieved. So we need a different type of capacity and training and culture in government if we're going to digitize government. We've talked about this before, but yes.
No, I think that's a really interesting idea that we have to abandon the idea that government can somehow give us certainty. And this is something that Canadians, like, we tend to be very trusting and very polite. And so when we just assume the government's working as hard as it can on things, right? The folks in Estonia told me our citizens don't trust us. Like on stage, the Minister for Digital Government said her constituents can go and look at what her hotel cost last night online right now. And that's not because they trust her. It's because they mistrust her. And so they had to build a system that was transparent to support that kind of trust, which I found was fascinating. Maybe Canadians trust that the government's doing what it can too much.
Well, and we just create processes that are intended to manage risk, but just create complexity. But I'll give you another one. My wife and I turned 65 last year, and we both got very thick envelopes from the Government of Canada that had 8-page forms, 2-sided, that we had to fill out as to whether or not we wanted to start accessing CPP, the Canada Pension Plan. This is insane. The CRA already has every piece of information necessary to do this. Why was I not just pinged by the CRA, securely log into my CRA account, go yes or no, or maybe someday in the future, remind me, down the road. Why? And then it's sorted out. Like, it blows my mind that the risk that was created is now I'm probably making mistakes as I fill out a form. probably. And then there's data entry mistakes when that form is then entered into another system in government rather than a secure API transferring
and also
over what
privacy issues, because you may like be pulling something out and typing it out in a browser that's been compromised. Like, the more times you're dealing with that information. I will say I had to get an importer of record number from the CRA to bring books into Canada. And after about 10 days and 30 times typing in my email address, I counted 32. I got the same number as my GST number, but one letter was changed. Yeah. And all I could think was, why don't you just give me that number? Like, if I never use it, I never use it. But now everyone with a GST number is also an importer of record. And the paperwork created is 0. Like, it's just, I don't understand. You can see the layers of bark that have grown around the core of the tree when you peel it back. Oh, somebody needed this record. Somebody needed that record. Somebody needed to make sure this was a different program. Someone added this later, but they couldn't transfer data between departments. You can almost do like archaeology on a government service and see that it started with this noble ambition, and then these layers of risk and process kind of just accreted. And the question I have is this inherent to a common law society? Like, the idea of common law is that we have these precedents. And so you cite a precedent. In the past, Your Honor, this guy got off because of this thing, so I should as well. Okay, that's justice, right? And then we rule on those precedents, and sometimes they become law. But we have layers of precedent that are kind of like society growing moss. And it really seems to me like if I was an autocratic organization or nation, I could make decisions that were like unilaterally not what I said before, because the structure is not, well, that precedent exists. It's almost like a notwithstanding clause for government itself, which is kind of strange and very complicated. But can you talk a little bit about like this idea of common law and precedent being something that makes it very hard to get rid of these layers?
I don't think it's an issue, genuinely, Alistair. Maybe it is, but there's a creative way for us to go around this. There's no question, because I'll go back to the cultural problem for a second. We do not have frontline personnel designing systems. We have policy people. So what are policy people? They haven't actually been a consumer of the service or a provider of the service. They are just designing the service up here. No business in the world would succeed without understanding what's happening at the customer company interface. It just wouldn't succeed, because if you don't understand what's happening with your customers and the experience that they have, you will never be able to improve. There may be places where things have to be done a certain way. I know there's ways that legislative change is needed to change some regulations, for sure. But there's also a hack on that. We could change the Statutory Instruments Act to allow standards to be used as being equivalent to regulations, so we don't actually need to change the legislation and the regulation. The minister can just, Governor and Council appointment, this standard is equivalent. So we can actually make that a tool of how we innovate going forward.
Okay, can you, I'm not a legislative scholar, so can you explain that a little more? That sounds like a very interesting hack I didn't know about until just now. Can you, It sounds like the equivalent of executive orders, but within government. So tell me how that works. What is that?
Effectively giving ministers the power. We already do it in medical devices and drugs. There is an expert advisory board to the minister to say, yes, you can now use this COVID vaccine, or you can now do this or that based on the evidence that these experts have reviewed. And that's a really important process to bring agility to the introduction of life-saving technologies. But we can do that also in less life and death related situations. We can do that in very boring situations. We can say, okay, there is evidence, there's standards, there's ways of operating that will manage the risks that the legislation and regulations were initially intended to manage. But the world has evolved and changed around that legislation and regulation. And the way you do it is you use standards by default, regulation by exception. There must be a really good reason why people in government in a black box are creating a regulation and then putting it out to the world to have companies with their lobbyists to come back and contest it, right? There's got to be a better way than that. And it's voluntary consensus standards like the Canada Standards Council, all the different things that keep our cars on the road, our planes in the sky, and our houses from burning down every day. It's, these standards are central.
I'm glad you mentioned those ones, because as soon as you think about the political divide in Canada, when you say the words COVID vaccine and you start talking about bringing in panels of experts, there's definitely a segment of the population, and probably the same segment that's frustrated with government for reasons of the services aren't very good, that would go, oh, that sounds like executive orders and overreach and emergency measures acts. I want you to, like, we rely on those things today to make sure that our food isn't poisonous and the planes don't catch on fire, right? And there are committees of experts who do that stuff because they know more about planes or food than some MP, for example. Is that right?
Agreed. But the important thing is when you're using standards versus regulations, regulations are developed in government and come out to the rest of the country. So it's an Ottawa-centric process. The process of developing a consensus-based standard is Canada in.
So a bunch of farmers around Canada could get together and go, these are the standards for a well-run farm. And then the minister could use those standards with the advice of an expert panel to inform the decisions they're making rather than making new regulations. Is that what you're saying?
Well, the neat thing about the consensus-based standards process is it's got users, it's got government, it's got all the different types of businesses, it's got everybody at the table, and they've got to come up with a consensus as to how we manage that. That's where USB-C came from. The Europeans then said, okay, we're going to use that as a standard. Everybody had to start moving around, and it changed the world.
Sure.
Everybody started using
So Canada has legislative tools to just rely on standards bodies that are outside in rather than regulations that are inside out.
We have the ability to make one simple change to the Statutory Instruments Act that would allow for that to be preferential to developing regulations.
Why hasn't that happened?
I don't know. No leadership. It wasn't important. I mean, the reality is government efficiency has not been a priority.
So let's talk about other examples of efficiency. I know a pet peeve of yours is air travel. You spend a lot of time on that plane from Nova Scotia all the way to Ottawa, and there are regulations and passenger protections that are enshrined in law, like the air passenger protection legislation that says that you get to claim damages or get your luggage refunded and so on. How would we modernize the legislation, or more importantly, like give the legislation the ability to actually have impact?
So the current processes aren't working, and the airlines can just, I think there's certainly, I've got opinions that there's some airlines that are functioning in a more customer-centric manner than others. But the reality is when I'm booking a ticket, why can't I see on a rolling basis that airline's success in getting the passengers and luggage to the destination on that route on time? Why can't I just see that evidence and compare it to other airlines on that same route and their prices? And that would foster greater competition and greater customer service, as far as I'm concerned. The fact that we don't do that means that we have a whole lot of complaints. I mean, I think there's a 70-year backlog of air travel complaints. I'm maybe exaggerating by a year or two, but it's outrageous, and they will never be dealt with. So why not just make it automatic? If your flight is this late, you get this refund, and it's automatic. You don't have to complain to get it. You just get it. And that's legislative a legislative change in how we think. Let's just put competition into these marketplaces. But Canada has a history of protecting our oligopolies, not making our oligopolies more competitive.
Why do you think that is?
I think it was a national strategy starting in the 80s that we had to have a lot of big companies in every sector in order to compete against the Americans. And as a result, we have a whole lot of our banking system, for example, a lot of systems that are designed to really protect 5 or 6 or 3 companies.
Telecom is another example. We pay the highest telecom
in the world.
data rates in the world. And the excuse is, well, the country's spread out pretty far. You know, every time someone gives me an excuse like that, I'm like, someone said, oh, we can't do digital ID because, you know, it's easy if you're Estonia. I'm like, yeah, but India did it, and it's got 1 billion citizens.
And we also have duplicated infrastructure in telecoms right across the country. And across Nova Scotia, you see 3 towers side by side or 2 towers side by side all the time. Why is there not just 1 tower and a forced tower sharing agreement? So that all of a sudden a new competitor can come in and clamp onto that tower, and we have competition that's driving innovation and competitiveness.
Well, and Bryce Sezchuk, when he set up Wind Mobile, same thing. They wanted to build a competitor, and they were eventually just forced to sell the company to one of the big telecoms.
And the regulatory moat just gets thicker and thicker, and it protects these incumbents from innovative, hardworking, fast-moving competitors.
Are you worried about, you know, what we see in the U.S. with Citizens United and campaign financing is that once those big oligopolies start to get political power and they're given the rights of free speech similar to citizens, then it becomes sort of an unstoppable thing where those regulations get enshrined. So are we at risk of that, or is there something that gives you hope in the Canadian political structure that we will resist that?
I think that our lobbying act needs to be considered by our Competition Bureau and say, is our lobbying act pro-competitive? Because I don't think it is. I think a backbench MP is treated the same way as a Minister of Finance or Minister of Transport, and I don't think that should be the way it is. I think that there absolutely should be more protections so that innovative new entrants have the same ability to bring forward crazy ideas like we're talking about here that gives them a chance to compete. Because if you're the best airline in getting people on time and with their luggage to a destination for the lowest price, no one will ever know that.
Yeah, and you can make claims, but I mean, those could be claims. There's no proof of it, right? As we move into this post-truth world, where it's easier than ever for someone to make up stuff, like an airline could literally make up fake videos today of lost baggage from a competitor, and we wouldn't know. The government serves this role of like actually providing verified outcomes and proof of verified outcomes that makes merit-based competition easier.
I think it's a really important point. But I just look at it and say, we need to have transparency. And why do we have all these thick layers of government regulation to protect Canadian consumers from the power of oligopolies, rather than just enabling competitors to provide better service at a more competitive rate and the competition doing it for government? And that's a cultural change that has to happen in our economy. It has to happen to our lobbying act. It has to happen to a whole lot of different pieces of government. But for me, it's crucial. And that's where we'll start to get some of these innovations being pulled into government and expectations changing.
You said when we started out that you were brought in to challenge the sort of status quo. And it feels like the advent of digital has upended almost every facet of government right now. Is digital government just government? Like, should everyone just be fixing? Like, should we stop calling it digital government? Just say this is what government needs to do?
That takes me back to Forward 50 last fall. I had a lot of fun when I was asked by you to debate with Katie Lalonde. We debated Hillary Hartley and Alexander McEachern on the assertion that digital government is just government. And I had a lot of fun in saying, not a chance. And I just went into, culture of governments. I mean, you can have a marvelous career in government. You can be promoted to the highest levels without ever having to consider, develop, or successfully deploy a digital service. Your departmental staff could keep moving up and have great careers without having to take a single course or assume any responsibility around modernizing the services which they're responsible for delivering. You can be a policy person, never have any frontline operational experience, but still be determining how that happens. I don't think any of those public servants that I've just referenced in general terms would ever continue to be a customer of a company that behaved the way that government behaves today.
Wow, that's a good line.
Right? It's just, they just wouldn't. They wouldn't put up with it. And so we have to change the culture and management expectations within government. Yes, it takes political leadership, but it isn't political leadership alone. There has to be capacity. Just to go back to where you were, and certainly there's a lot of stuff on my website if anybody's interested about DIA, but Ukraine did it with its hands tied behind its back, fighting a war. It digitized its entire economy. It was further behind than we were. It has addressed the problems we need to address. We've got a model. They want to help. When I was chatting with Slava Banik, who was sort of the guy in the trenches, he literally is the guy in the trenches now, unfortunately. But when he was in the trenches building DIA, he said, we'd love to help. We'll give you everything. They want to thank us.
Yeah.
But digital government is not government. They're two different things.
Gulsana Mamedieva, who is now at Georgetown, talk about DIA. And what was amazing to me was it wasn't just we built a solution. It was we did things like single sign-on and digital identity that then allowed us to identify and authenticate citizens so we could spot the spies and get reports of saboteurs. Like, it became a tool of national security. And in Canada's situation, we find ourselves divisive, angry at one another because these services don't work, but also I think vulnerable because we don't have the kinds of unified systems that allow the country to behave as one in times of crisis.
Yep. And when you get systems that are frustrating and you throw up your hands about government, that doesn't help us to come together.
Yeah. Okay. What do you hope this podcast accomplishes? You know, the mission, you know, the goal is reasonable. It's like, just make government functional again. What do you hope this podcast accomplishes?
I'm a real believer that you can help to create the evidence of change. I really like the fact that you want to go at this, Alistair, in a way that's not blaming or harming anyone. You just want to find the blockages. What's stopping us in this discrete area? What's stopping us from making that happen? Why is that not possible right now? Why aren't we making progress on that, whatever it is that's blocking us from moving ahead? How do we get over it? How do we get under it? How do we get through it? How do we get around it? I like that you're focused that way, because if people feel like this is about finding embarrassing examples and punishing people for the fact that there's an embarrassing example, we won't make any headway at all. There's enough of an adversarial nature in Ottawa at this time that we don't need more of it. So I really commend you. That's what I hope, that you can deliver on this really important aspiration, which is, let's just try and understand why it's not possible. I want to have the increased security, privacy, and control that a digital credential would give me. I want that desperately. But disinformation campaigns, I get emails in my office all the time saying that people don't want digital identity or digital credentials because they want to keep their privacy, their security, and their control. Well, they don't have it.
The irony is they don't understand that the government already knows that stuff, and single sign-on will let you see what the government knows, and that we already trust, Netflix, Facebook, all these other organizations with those sign-ons, and we have no sort of recourse to them. I mean, the digital identity thing is a whole can of worms, and I'm actually going to wait for a while to get to that, because
I think you should.
So many of the problems, the answers I get from people are, oh, it's because of federation, like we're provinces and a country, and it's because of digital identity. So I want to go after things where those two do not apply, but those really are like the linchpins that would unlock all of this stuff. And the disinformation around it, there's a fascinating study that was done across 20 or 30 nations where they asked people if they would spend 1% of their GDP to fight climate change. And about 68% of people said yes. But then they asked them, how many other people feel this way? And those people said about 40%. The world doesn't change until we have what's called common knowledge of a thing. Not just we know, not just everybody knows, but everybody knows that everybody else knows. If every Canadian knew every other Canadian was frustrated with the state of digital services, if every Canadian knew that every other Canadian knew that we'd slid from number 3 to number 47, then I think this would be the top of the list platform request. And we would realize that some fringe group of 5 or 10% that is believing the nonsense in their endless feeds, as opposed to taking the time to understand that digital identity is actually a way to get more security and understand more about what the government knows about you, those people would just evaporate. So I think this podcast, if it can do anything, will hopefully create common knowledge. The idea that we all know that everybody else knows that government is not functional and can be made functional if we're just willing to do the work.
I genuinely am grateful for the creativity with which you bring to big, hairy problems.
We'll see. It feels like a target right now, but yeah.
I look forward to being whatever help I can be. I think helping people to understand the discrete, solvable problem, what's stopping progress, and 1 or 2 success stories. And there have been some success stories in Ottawa this way lately. Let's start to build on them, and then we can point to them and start to get some momentum. Because the good folks are I think, who really want to do this work are getting really frustrated. They're not feeling supported. And if we can start to create that momentum, I think more people would be attracted to solving the problem. I commend you. Thank you, Alistair.
Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. And as always, love the challenge that you bring to the status quo. So keep at it. Thanks for joining us on the Functional Government Podcast.